Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So in continuation from the Carl and Rick kind of storylines so far, today I'm going to be talking about Carl Grimes. Now a lot of people say that I say Carol and Carl really kind of similar. So to specify, today I'm talking about Coral. I think he's a really interesting character and he's kind of overlooked a lot when it comes to kind of the character development and the growth of a character on the show. So season 1 and kind of season 2 Carl is very much a child. He's very childlike, he's very innocent and immature. Laurie's catchphrase in season 1 and 2 is just, "Where is Coral?" No one ever seems to know where that bloody child is. He's always slipping off unnoticed. Parenting skills are not on point there. So we see in season 1 that he's quite shy, he's quiet, he kind of develops a friendship with Sophia. And of course, at the start of season 1, Carl and Laurie both think that Rick is dead because of the bullshit lies that Shane told them. Now I know that Shane had his reasons for telling them that, but still. So when we finally see Carl reunite with his father, and it's a big happy moment, everyone's hugging, it's all also emotional and happy. Then we see the kind of conflict that there is between Carl and his relationship with Rick versus Carl and his relationship with Shane. Rick goes back to Atlanta to pick up the guns that he dropped and to unchain poor Merle from the roof. And Carl stays behind... The fuck? And Carl stays behind with the kind of rest of the group and with Shane. We then see Shane take Carl out fishing, which is a very kind of father-son activity. So you can see the contrasting relationships between Carl and his father and Carl and Shane. Shane had been looking after him and Laurie for a while since Rick was in the coma. So he's become almost kind of like a father figure. Then we have the scene where they're on the highway and Carl goes into a car by himself to get the knives off of the dead person. I nearly had a fucking heart attack during that scene. This little boy climbing up onto this big ass car with a dead person that could be a walker and could just fucking eat him. So he gets the knives and he brings them back to Shane. And this kind of causes conflict again because kind of Laurie's giving out to him for going off by himself like he always does. I don't know why it's a surprise to her at this point. Carl in his head was doing something good, he was doing something mature, he was bringing kind of weapons back like any of the other men would. When Sophia goes missing, we see Carl go out in the search for her. Again, he's trying to kind of shake away the childlike qualities that he still has. Then we have the scene where the poor Crater is shot. Otis tries to shoot the deer, but it goes through and hits Carl. I come to think of it, that poor child is terrible luck. All he was doing was looking at some nature and then he ended up getting shot. I think this scene was really important for him because, like his dad, like Rick, he'd ended up getting shot. But this time it was during the apocalypse and, you know, medical care and all that stuff was really kind of hard to come by. But this is how they meet Herschel and the farm and all that storyline. Then we have the scene where he sneaks into the barn to talk to Randall. That's the fella that fell off the roof and got his leg impaled on the gate. Again, Carla kind of watched the fellas come and go from the barn talking to Randall, and I think he was kind of curious as to if he could do anything to help, if he could get any information out of him. We have the scene where he insults Carol when she's talking about God or she's talking about religion. He's still very young and it must be very hard for him to try to come to terms with this world. But when he kind of goes off with Carol like that and then stomps away, that's kind of like a typical pre-teen mood swing. Then we have the fact that he accidentally caused Dale's death. We see him sneak off into the woods by himself and he comes across this walker that was stuck in the mud. And then he does what no sane person would do and he starts throwing rocks at the walker. If I was the walker, I'd be pissed as well. I'd start flinging mud back at him. But he throws he throws rocks at the walker. I think he's curious because he hasn't really been this close to one by himself before. And I think he knows that it's stuck and it can't move and this is his chance to kind of observe it and see something up close that he hasn't before. He's always hearing and seeing the grown-ups talk and deal with them, but he hasn't personally. So I think this was his kind of big kid moment where he thought, oh, like, I got this. Then of course, the walker frees his leg, Carl just darts for it, he just legs it, doesn't tell anyone, gets back to the farm, and Laurie's like, "Come on, Coral!" Completely clueless to the fact that her son had been out playing with a walker. And then when the walker gets free, of course, it bites Dale and rips him to shreds. And Carl takes this to heart because it is his fault. He provoked the walker into becoming free. I think this was the first death that he felt responsible for. The weight of it fell on him. I think this is where Carl learns that every single thing you do in this world has a consequence, no matter how small or how trivial it may seem. Now this all must be really hard for a child to try to come to terms with, because even if I was put in that situation, my mind would be blown. I'd be like, what? But this kid is experiencing all of this stuff and he's still really very young at this stage. Then we have the speech with Rick in the barn where Rick says to Carl you know, someday I'm gonna die, your mom's gonna die, you're gonna have to survive. I thought this speech was absolutely brilliant. Carl had spent so much time being told to kind of shush, oh, you know, go let the adults talk, don't hold a gun, don't do this, don't do that, don't go away by yourself. But this was the first time that Rick kind of spoke to him as an equal, where he said it like it was, where he was like, yeah, no one's safe in this world, and I could die, your mother could die, you need to be prepared. And that is the exact speech that I would give my kid. Maybe I wouldn't phrase it in that way and freak them out, but I think that was the mature thing to do on Rick's part, because telling your child, oh, you know, don't hold a gun, don't hold a knife, it's okay, the grown-ups will take care of it. Telling your child all of that in an apocalypse is just setting them up to fail, because there will come a day when they'll be left on their own, or they'll find themselves in a situation that they won't know how to handle because you've babied them. That speech was, I think, an eye-opener for Carl, because Laurie had spent so much time babying him and, you know, kind of shielding him from things, and then Rick just blatantly and honestly comes out with all of this. Then we have the scene where he kills Shane. This was probably the main turning point for him. Up to this point he'd always kind of been childish and very childlike, but when he shoots zombie Shane to save his dad, when I first saw that scene I thought, oh fuck, he's gonna shoot Rick, what? But he doesn't, he shoots past Rick and he shoots Shane. He shoots Shane. That was the turning point for him, the first real main kind of growth development for him. Then when we get on to season 3 we see Carl is more mature, but he's a lot more hot-headed. He's trying to deal with things and come to terms with things, but he doesn't really know how to. So we see him, he's really distant, he's kind of emotionally detached, he's kind of quieter, he is more fight or flight mode. He's a little bit like Shane, I thought, in this season. Starts the season when it shows you all the group on the road after the farm had burnt down. I think it was just before they found the prison. And they're all on the road and they've been talking about how they've been, you know, travelling all winter. Carl stands with somebody else and he takes watch. So while the group are kind of congregated around the car and they're trying to plan a route, Carl is trusted to take watch, which is quite a big deal. I mean, if I was trusted to take watch, I'd be like, don't trust me with that shit. A walker could creep up by me and I wouldn't even see him. But the fact that they trusted Carl with that shows they were trusting him more, they were kind of giving him more room to grow. Now at this stage in the show, Laurie is really pregnant. When she goes into labour, Carl and Maggie are with her. When Carl shot his mother, I was actually shocked. I mean, I have a very close relationship with my mother, but like, even if she was gonna turn into a walker or whatever, I wouldn't be able to shoot her. I don't care what situation we were in, like, I wouldn't be able to do it. And he's still only a child at this point. He's like, what, 13, 14? And he does it. He has to watch Maggie cut Judith out of her stomach and then shoot Laurie so she doesn't come back as a walker. I thought that was incredibly strong and incredibly brave of him. And it's something that season 1 Carl would not have been able to do. And of course after this then Rick goes fucking Rambo and goes off into the prison and starts killing everything that moves. I think it's after seeing Rick go dark side like that and go a bit mad that Carl kind of realises we've gone a bit too far. So Carl has that speech with Rick where he tells him that maybe he should step down, maybe he should take a break from being leader. And this is kind of Carl taking a lot of responsibility and being really mature about the matter, that he can see that his father isn't handling this well, he can see that his father is strained and needs a break. And then we have the scene where he kills the young fella outside the gates. I think he was one of like the governor's crew or something. He was with Herschel, but this fella kind of snuck up on them and then was trying to surrender or something. And Carl just kind of wasn't having any of it, he just shot him. This shocked the bejesus out of Herschel, understandably. This was where we see Carl go a little bit Shane, a little bit demented and not thinking straight, but he wasn't aware of the fact that he wasn't thinking straight. In his head, this was the thing to do, this was what should be done. Then we have him go a bit mellow, we have him go a bit farmer with his father. One morning when he gets up, he's coming down to where the kind of pigs are kept, and Rick says to him, oh, I thought I'd let you sleep in because you were up reading comics. That's a real kind of typical young teen thing to do, and it's the first kind of normal thing that we've seen Carl do the whole show. Just kind of talk about comics and just be a kid. Then we see him giving out to Lizzie for naming the walkers. Again, very mature thing, he's kind of talking down to her like an adult would a child. He's saying to her, you know, why are you naming them? Don't name them, they're not people. While Lizzie is very innocent, very simple-minded, very immature, Carl is now the complete opposite. And then we have him take control of the kind of Carl book club situation. Carl is teaching the kids how to fight and how to defend themselves under the cover of book club. Carl finds out about it and tells Rick, but then he later tells Rick that he should allow Carl to do this. This is Carl seeing what has to be done. He's seeing that this woman is trying to help these kids the way that nobody really did for Carl. In season 1 and season 2, when he was around the same age that the kids were that were going to book club, he was babied. He was kind of shunned away from all that kind of stuff. And I think he saw that, and he saw that Carl was trying to teach them. She was trying to get them ready. She was trying to make sure that if they were ever caught by themselves that they would be okay. Then we have a scene after the prison where Carl is with Rick in the house, and Rick is badly injured and he passes out, and then Carl gives him the whole "I don't need you" speech. I think that was Carl getting out a lot of his frustration and just venting to him. Because if you're kind of angry at a person, there's things you want to say, but you don't necessarily want to say them, because if you say them, you can't take the words back. I think when Rick kind of passed out, Carl kind of saw this as his opportunity to just let loose. We see that he actually does partly blame Rick for Laurie's death. There's a lot of resentment, there's a lot of bitterness there. Then he lures the walkers away from the front door. This is when we see that Carl isn't actually a child, he's more than capable of handling himself. So he lures these walkers away, but then they all fall on him, and you're like, oh Jesus, Carl's going to be eaten, but he's not. He makes it out of it alive. Then we have the scene where he goes into the house by himself, and that crazy ass walker chases him around the top of the house and robs his shoe. But Carl survived it, and I love what he wrote on the door. He was like, Walker got my shoe and I got away, or something like that. But the little message that he writes on the door is so positive, and I think it resounds in Carl's head that he is a survivor, that along the way he will lose parts of himself, but he'll be okay at the end of the day. He'll still be alive. When he goes back to the house and Rick is still passed out of action on the couch, when Rick started reaching towards him, I thought, oh, what the fuck? And Carl has the gun and he's like, oh yeah. He's kind of psyching himself up, getting ready to do what he did for his mother, but he can't. Just as Rick is reaching for him, Carl kind of puts down the gun, and I thought that was so heartbreaking, because Carl had been trying so hard to prove, even just to himself, he'd been trying to prove to himself that he was mature, he was an adult now, he was just as good mentally as everybody else in this group. But when Rick was reaching towards him, it was as if he just gave up. I mean, generally speaking, he could have killed Rick there. Like, if he'd been a walker, he could have done it. But he couldn't bring himself to do it, and in that moment he just accepted the fact that his dead father was going to eat him. Now, it turned out that Rick wasn't in fact a walker, and all was good in the world. And then Michonne comes along and meets up with them, and it's great. When Carl is out on the road with Michonne and Rick, and the claimed group stumble across them, they threaten to rape and kill Carl. Carl must have been absolutely fucking terrified at this stage, because, I mean, you're on your own on the road, and these group of fucking psychos come across you. Like, he probably couldn't see any way to get out of this, like, alive or unhurt. Rick goes a little bit Hannibal and eats out your man's throat, and all is good. It's just after that scene where Rick kills the group and Michonne kills the group that we see Michonne with her arms around Carl, and she's holding him like you would a little child, and she's kind of rubbing his hair. And then that night she sleeps in the car with him, and he has his head down on her lap and she's rubbing his hair. It's a real kind of mother-son relationship. It's really comforting. It's so trusting. I mean, Carl must have been absolutely scarred after that situation, and I think that got rid of any innocence that he had left. Because after that scene when they go on to Alexandria, Carl has just grown the fuck up. I mean, there isn't really any childish qualities about him anymore. There isn't really any immaturity. I think that particular instance it really resounded with him. I think it made him see how cruel the world was, and how, like, you can't trust anyone, you can't be friends with anyone you don't know. Of course, Terminus had an impact on him as well. I mean, you're taken in to a fucking holding facility with a bunch of people that want to eat you, and then when he was put in the kind of cart, and everyone was like making shivs out of nothing and wrapping their earrings around their fists so they could stab people, Carl just kind of went along with it. He held his own, fair play to him. But, like, all of that has to have had an effect on him. It, like with the grown-ups, it would have an effect on them, but on Carl, he's still developing. And I think the thing about Carl as well is, because he was a child when the apocalypse started, he wasn't even a teenager when it started, and because he's grown up and matured in the apocalypse, he has an advantage. Because with the adults, they're already set in their ways. They're already developed and matured. They're grown-ups. They knew the world as it was. Carl was still very young, so him adapting and developing to the new situations would be easier for him, because, you know, he never knew having a job or having to pay taxes or having to do this, that or the other. This is the world that he knows now, and it would be easier for him to adapt quicker than it would a grown-up. So I think he did have that slight advantage. and I think he's handling the whole situation really, really well. When they finally get to Alexandria and Carl meets the other kind of kids his age, we see him have a little bit of difficulty kind of mingling with them at the beginning. They're kind of talking about their hideout and their comics and stuff like that, and Carl seems a bit standoffish with them. He's been used to life outside the walls. He's been used to being on the run and fighting for his life and watching people that he loves die. And then he's looking at these kids that have just lived in Alexandria since it began and talk about comics and shit. I think that's why he connected with Enid from early on. She was the only one that had kind of experienced life properly outside the walls like Carl had. She didn't really talk to anybody. She was a little bit distant as well like Carl was, and I think that's why he could relate to her. And then in the more recent season, in season 6, we see that whole thing go down with Ron. He saved Ron and brought him into the house, and then Ron, being the little bastard that he is, tried to fucking shoot Rick, but Carl, God help us, got in the way and got his eye blown out. Carl has been shot twice, and both times it has been by accident. If that is not the worst fucking luck, then I don't know what is. And then more recently, when the group were just about to leave Alexandria to go off and try and get Maggie to a hospital, we saw Carl lock Enid in the kind of cupboard. Enid, although she is very similar to Carl, I feel like Enid still isn't really there mentally. There's still very immature qualities about her. She's still very kind of flighty, very act on impulse. I think Carl saw that, and Carl was just like, no, just stay in the fucking closet. And he locked her in there, I think, for her own safety. It's like Carl knew something bad was going to go down and he didn't want her to have any part of it. But with Enid, we saw Carl kind of sneak outside the walls a few times with her. In the beginning, he used to kind of follow her and just creep on her in the woods. But then, as kind of time went on, they went out together and they'd sit down and they'd read comics. Kind of like a date out in the woods where you watch the dead walk past you when you read comic books. It's romantic. And then, of course, he goes with Rick and the group, and then they end up meeting Negan. In the Negan scene, I think we see Carl's true colours. Negan squats down in front of him and he says something like, well, shit kid, cry a little. But Carl won't. If that was me and all of my friends and family were lined up beside me and this crazy motherfucker with a bat was walking up and down, I would be ugly crying down my face. I'd have my face down in the dirt and I would just be sobbing. But Carl was looking him in the eye and he looked fierce. I was like, damn Carl. Remind me to never fucking oppose you. He looked fierce, and I think Negan saw that as well. Negan saw that this kid was strong, this kid had potential. And I think Carl being there was part of the reason why Rick lost his shit like he did. We see Rick go to pieces in the finale, and he's crying and he's all over the place. I think the reason that he went to shit like that was, my mother actually pointed this out to me. I rewatched the episode with my mum after I watched the finale, and my mum pointed it out to me. I was like, what's going on with Rick? Like, he's freaking out. And my mum was like, well, he's probably thinking his son is right there. Negan's going to pick someone to kill and his son is right there. If Negan wanted to get to Rick really and freak him out, he'd kill the son or he'd attack the son. Carl. I thought that was a very good point. Rick wasn't just freaking out because he had underestimated the situation and walked his friends into danger. His son was kneeling on the floor beside him, like all of the other grown-ups and adults were. His son was just as involved in this as everyone else. Then we have Carl's relationship with Michonne. After Laurie died, he went a bit cold, he went a bit distant and weird. But when Michonne comes into it, Carl is very kind of hesitant to talk to her and to trust her, and he's like, no. But then the scene where he goes off looking for the picture of his family in the bar, Michonne goes with him and Michonne helps him to get it. And I think this is the first kind of bonding experience between the two. As the seasons go on, we see Michonne really cement herself with Carl and Rick as kind of part of their family. It's like an unspoken thing that she has just moulded with them. And then of course, Rick and Michonne get together, and when Rick tells Carl, Carl's just like, yeah, it's cool. So that shows that he accepts Michonne, that he loves her like he would a mother. I think his relationship with her is very important for him, for his development, for his character, whatever. That is just my little rundown on Carl Grimes and how he went from being a babied, immature little fella to somebody who can be trusted, somebody who's viewed as an equal with Darl or Rick or any of them. Carl is now an equal, he has earned his place, he's well respected, and I think all of the group finally see that. So I hope you guys all enjoyed. I love Carl. I love his development. I think he's a fantastic little character. I think Chandler Riggs is amazing and portrays him fantastically. I know there's been a lot of differences between the comics and the show for Carl's character, but I really enjoy his character on the show and I think it's very well portrayed. Can I just say that Carl is a much better big brother than Seth from Fear the Walking Dead. That motherfucker took his little brother off of a safe boat to bring him back onto a pier of an island that was overrun by walkers while their dead walker mother casually stumbled towards them. Carl Grimes is, in my opinion, a fantastic big brother. I mean, he would do anything for his little sister. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Next, I think I'll be doing Daryl because I have a lot of requests from people asking to do him. So it's either going to be Daryl or Glenn next. Hopefully I'll be uploading one character profile a week. So fingers crossed that all stays well, and I'll talk to you all soon.